Hey guys, Shuldoge here. Today we are looking at the Matrova vane. Matrova has been around as a factory for around 5 years now, but didn't start releasing their own mouse pads under the Matrova branding until early January of 2025. This pad is supposed to be one of their more skin-friendly options, with a speed that lands just above that of the Balance X, which is their take on the Artisan Zero. I bought this one from the Matrova website, which you can either buy the default whitish version or make a custom pad with the surface. It is worth mentioning that my custom design came with the PU mid base rather than the PU soft as default, which I will talk about more later on in the video. The size shown on this pad is 490 by 420 millimeters, but the standard version also comes in 400 by 450 millimeters, and there are countless other options for custom pads in terms of size. Now, onto the surface. Looking at a macro shot, this is one of the more interesting surface weaves I've seen. From a surface level, it looks something akin to a Neptune-like weave, but the stitching is much looser, and the fabric itself used in the stitching seems to be much thicker than other pads. Furthermore, the fabric almost looks like it's been twisted or coiled, giving it the odd curvature that you can see in the structure. This pad, despite its very unique surface weave, performs very similarly to the PureTrack P51 Mustangs. The two pads have nearly identical static and dynamic glide, and I would say the only thing that sets these two pads apart is the feel, with the vane having a slightly more defined graininess to it, which also contributes to it having a little bit more stopping power than the P51 Mustang. But switching between the two pads, it's hard to tell an immediate difference between the two. While the P51 Mustang's low static friction is its focus, I would say this pad's dynamic friction is slightly lower than the static friction. Not so much to the point where this pad would only be best met with flicking scenarios, but just enough to the point where it's noticeable. Stopping power on the pad is definitely one of its strong points, despite its decently quick dynamic glide. I find that I'm able to stop very quickly, especially on the Y-axis. This is a very skin-friendly surface, but I would say it still retains the grippiness of rougher surfaces when pressing down on it. While I wouldn't say there is a difference in feel between the X and Y-axis, the Y-axis definitely does feel like it has more friction to it than the X-axis. While the sweat resistance on this pad is quite good, and it seems to be pretty resistant to humidity as well, one thing I will say is my forearm drags a lot on this pad, which makes me wish that this pad was more sleeve friendly, which I'll talk about more on later. If it weren't for that issue, this pad would be a top contender for my favorite pad. As stated previously, I would say this pad isn't quite sleeve friendly, as my GamerSupps sleeve slides well on the Y-axis but grips moderately on the X-axis, and my TBTL sleeve, on the other hand, works moderately well on the X-axis but grips heavily on the Y-axis. Though if you don't have any problems with humidity, I wouldn't imagine it would be a bad experience to play without a sleeve. If you really have to, though, I've heard from a second source that the Kibu sleeve works well with the vane, specifically if you invert it. Despite the nature of the surface weave, I find it very easy to brush debris off this pad, and I haven't been finding any hairs lodged into the surface either. Moving on to the base, the mid-PU base, as expected, consists of a polyurethane rubber, as is supposed to be Matrova's take on a mid-base. Now, normally the vane would be paired with the PU soft base, but I believe it pairs much better with the mid-base, which I'll go more into detail on shortly. The base definitely has a stickiness to it, not so much as the X-Soft PLR base that I reviewed previously with the Shadow Hunt, but I prefer it in that way, as firmer bases are much more able to retain their stickiness from personal experience over that of soft bases. This base specifically is 3.5 millimeters thick, as is all of their polyurethane bases. Compared to the alpha cell base of the P51 Mustang, which we compared this pad to earlier, this pad is a little bit more plush, far from plush enough to invalidate dot skates, but plush enough to the point where you can see the give of the base when pressing into the pad. People who have tried the base have also said that it's a bit more plush than the Artisan Mid, so you can use that as a reference point as well. On the other hand, the PU Soft is very comparable to the Artisan Soft bases, so if you are sticking to the PU Soft, then take the Artisan Soft bases as a standpoint instead. The adherence to the desk on the Matrova PU bases are especially strong, and Funny story about this one is there was some curling on the edges with this pad, but I didn't even notice until I picked it up because the edges were just sticking that well. Despite the aforementioned plushness of this base, it still maintains a sense of solidity when used in play. The rebound is much quicker than the P51 Mustang's Alpha Cell base, and has a surprising amount of strength to the kickback of the recoil. The time it takes for the base to return to the previous state isn't instant, but it's very good when it comes to akin rubber bases. I've had no issues whatsoever with donut skates, and it takes some considerable effort to even out donut skates. The stitching pattern that Matrova follows, I feel, is very similar to the stitching pattern that LGG follows with their standard series. It does mesh with the base and isn't fully stitched on the bottom, as you can see each individual thread poking out. Matrova has definitely, I feel personally, taken a step forward from their overstitched corners, as the stitching here is much more even than the last pad I received, resulting in a much more uniform plushness all around the edges. The plushness of the stitching does even out about where the plushness of the surface does as well. And like my last pad, Matrova does a very good job with keeping the stitching below the surface. You don't feel your mouse cross the edge with donut or dot skates, let alone with full skates like the ones I have here. Moving on to quality, the surface is not coated and the feel of the surface hasn't changed since when I first got it. The pad is consistently the same speed and feel all along the surface, and I can tell the heat treatment that Matrova uses seems to be very good, as I can still feel the natural properties of the cloth, which you start to lose if the heat treatment process is too tough. The printing quality is solid on the edges, but you do start to lose some of the finer details with small lettering or other details that are small and close to one another. Most of what I've experienced on this pad has kept true to what is said on the website. However, I would say the static friction is only slightly higher than the dynamic friction, contrary to what they have listed on the website. The logo is printed into the design of the pad, so zero issues with it affecting the performance. As for the base, Matrova has had the biggest improvement when it comes to the bumpiness of the surface on their mouse pads from personal experience. This time the bumps on the surface from the base are nearly impossible to notice. You won't notice anything while playing, and the surface feels luxuriously smooth to a light touch. The dimensions of this pad stand true to the 490 by 420 millimeters listed on the website, and there aren't any major discrepancies around the edges. After searching for a while, I did find one small spot on the pad that had more give than the rest of the pad, which I suspect to be a small air pocket between the surface and the base, but this is so minuscule to the point where it won't affect performance whatsoever. As for the stitching, as I said earlier in the video, Matrova took a big step up with their stitching compared to my previous review. The stitching on the corners is much more even with the edges, and the distance from stitch to stitch is much more even than the Shadow Hunt. There's still room for improvement, of course, as it's not perfect, and there are some minor hitches where the distance decreases from stitch to stitch, but not too much to the point where it would impact performance. The implementation for the stitching where it meets is quite clean, and another big step up for Matrova was moving the position of the stitching overlaps after I asked them about it, so kudos to them. The plushness of the overlap is much more firm than the rest of the edges, which is to be expected, and you won't feel any loose fabric near the overlap unless you really grab onto it. Stitching where I have placed my arm has not frayed or loosened from what I can tell either, which is a plus. As for customer experience, the customer service is once again the best I've experienced, hands down. Matrova was with me every step of the way to get this pad sent out to me, and the shipping was much faster than what I had experienced previously from the Shadow Hunt. The community is also super active. The CEO of the company is always keeping people hyped in the Discord server, and they regularly have giveaways to have more people try out and test their pads for them. Really good stuff here. The purchasing and customization experience was fairly easy, though I do wish there was some sort of preview of what your pad would look like, as well as an option to keep the name of the pad next to the logo, but these are all things you can just add to the custom order instructions. The shipping is a little bit frustrating with US Customs, as it won't show how far it is into customs with USPS tracking provided by the shipping partner, but it's nothing worth fussing too much over. Matrova did decrease the shipping cost, partially for that reason. As for the price, this pad with shipping totals around $42. a big step up from their previous price listings. It is packaged in one large bazooka tube. This one didn't have any major dents this time around, but others have had trouble with it being opened during customs. No incidents have occurred as far as I'm aware yet, with a pad being bent out of shape though. Does not come with any other accessories like stickers or skates, and if you don't mind waiting, Matrova makes some really great pads at an affordable price, all of which are customizable except for their Breeze V2 review coming soon. In conclusion, I would recommend this pad to someone who is looking for a smooth, luxurious, and slightly speed-lenient balance pad with a focus on clean, fluid movements. This pad is amazing, and despite its lacking sleeve friendliness, I would feel wrong rating it any lower than an 85 out of 100. I will certainly be buying from Matrova again, and at the time of this video, already have ordered from Matrova again. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.